The night air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint smokiness of a distant barbecue. Olivia adjusted the hem of her dress as she and her husband, Ethan, approached the grand house, the glow of the party already visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Ethan squeezed her hand reassuringly, flashing her a warm smile. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his breath warm against her cheek. She smiled, but a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. It wasn't that she didn't like Ethan's friends. She just never felt fully comfortable around them. They were a tight-knit group from college, bonded by years of wild parties, inside jokes, and shared experiences. Olivia, having met Ethan much later, was always the outsider, the one still trying to fit in. As they stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and whiskey. Laughter and music filled the grand living room, where small groups of people stood around, chatting and sipping cocktails. The energy in the house was lively, but something about it felt different tonight.
"Ethan."
"Olivia." Finally, a voice called out. Jason, Ethan's best friend and the host of the party, walked toward them with an easy grin. He was always effortlessly charming, the kind of man who knew how to command a room without even trying. Jason pulled Ethan into a quick hug and then turned to Olivia, giving her a hug that lingered just a little too long. His hand rested lightly on her back before he pulled away, his eyes twinkling with something she couldn't quite place. "We were starting to think you weren't coming," Jason teased, handing Ethan a drink. "Wouldn't miss it," Ethan replied. "Besides, Olivia needs to get to know everyone better." Olivia smiled politely as Jason led Ethan toward the bar, already diving into a conversation about their college days. She took a moment to scan the room. The guests were mostly familiar faces, Ethan's old friends, their spouses, and a few newcomers she didn't recognize. Some of the women gave her warm smiles, but there was an underlying exclusivity to the group, as if she hadn't quite earned her place yet. Feeling a little overwhelmed, Olivia wandered toward the balcony for some fresh air. The city skyline stretched out in the distance, twinkling like a sea of tiny lights. She took a deep breath, trying to shake the feeling that tonight was going to be different. "Not a fan of big parties?" The voice behind her was smooth and familiar. She turned to see Tyler, one of Ethan's closest friends, leaning casually against the doorway. He was the quiet one of the group, always watching, always listening. "I don't mind them," Olivia said, swirling the wine in her glass. "I just don't always feel like I fit in." Tyler chuckled. "Yeah, I get that. This group can be a lot." She smiled at his honesty. "You seem to handle it just fine." He shrugged. "I've known them forever. But even then, sometimes I feel like the odd one out." She appreciated his candor. It was rare for anyone in Ethan's group to admit to feeling anything less than completely at ease. Just then, Ethan appeared in the doorway, draping an arm around Olivia's shoulders.
"There you are."
"I was looking for you." She smiled up at him, grateful for his presence.
"Come on," he said.
Jason's starting one of his famous games. Olivia hesitated but allowed Ethan to lead her back inside. In the center of the living room, the group had gathered in a loose circle. Jason stood in the middle, holding up a bottle of expensive whiskey. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "it's time for truth or dare," with a twist. A few people groaned playfully, but most laughed, clearly excited. Olivia's stomach tightened. She wasn't a huge fan of these kinds of games, but she knew Jason thrived on stirring things up. The rules were simple. If you refused to answer a truth or complete a dare, you had to take a double shot. The game started off harmless enough, funny dares, light-hearted confessions. But as the night went on, the questions became bolder, the dares riskier. Then Jason's eyes landed on Olivia. A slow smirk spread across his face. "Olivia," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Truth or dare?" She hesitated. "Truth." Jason leaned forward, his gaze locked onto hers. "Have you ever thought about being with someone other than Ethan?" The room fell silent. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She could feel Ethan's arms stiffen slightly around her. She forced a laugh, trying to play it off. "That's a dangerous question." Jason's grin widened. "That's the point." Olivia glanced at Ethan, whose expression was unreadable. She wasn't sure what answer he was expecting, but she knew she had to choose her words carefully. I think it's normal for people to wonder about different possibilities, she said slowly. But Ethan is the only man I've ever wanted to be with. The room exhaled collectively, the tension breaking. Jason held up his hands in mock surrender. Good answer. The game continued, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Jason kept stealing glances at her, his gaze lingering just a little too long. And Ethan. He was quieter than usual, his grip on her a little firmer, as if trying to stake his claim. As the night went on, the guests slowly trickled out, leaving behind only the core group of friends. Olivia found herself in the kitchen, refilling her drink, when Jason walked in behind her. You handled that well, he said, leaning against the counter. She tensed slightly, but kept her expression neutral. It was just a game. Jason's gaze was intense. Was it? She swallowed, suddenly very aware of how close he was standing. There was a charged silence between them, a moment where anything could have happened, where she could have made a choice that changed everything. Before she could respond, the door swung open and Ethan walked in. His eyes flicked between the two of them, his jaw tightening slightly. Everything okay? He asked, his voice even but firm. Jason smirked and stepped back. Of course. Just getting another drink. Ethan's hand found Olivia's, his grip strong as he led her out of the kitchen. They didn't speak about it on the drive home, but the silence between them was heavy. That night, as Olivia lay in bed beside Ethan, she stared at the ceiling, knowing that something had shifted in their marriage. And she wasn't sure if they would ever be the same again.